Hello and good evening from Kansas City. My name is Nathan Provost. I wanted to go ahead and jump into this first week's discussion board post. Before I discuss the two dissertations that I read about this week, I want to go ahead and cover the background of my own dissertation topic, which covers the Battle of Cold Harbor during the American Civil War. My argument follows the thinking that the battle actually began May 28th with engagements around Bethesda Church and ended with Grant's movement south June 12th. And in that time period, Grant assaulted Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia all across the line on June 3rd. And he lost roughly 6,000 men in that day alone. But the interesting thing about this, despite him getting called a butcher and getting accused of poor generalship, he actually ordered all men to hold their most forward position. Meaning, he said, stay where you are and begin using regular approaches. Start using siege tactics against the Confederate army. So they started to press the Confederate army by simply digging in and making breastworks, trenches that stretched miles. And this order comes from the OR, the official records of the War of Rebellion, in volume 36, page 30. And the reason why this is so significant to me is that I feel like Grant the engineer is often left out. So I actually looked for some dissertations about Grant and engineering. And so there was one dissertation that I came across by Justin Solonic. He wrote a dissertation entitled "The Vicksburg Siege Considered as a Problem in Military History." He determined that on page 17 that Grant's strength of mind and his ability to push his soldiers to adapt to the circumstances enabled them to use these same tactics to press the Confederates around Vicksburg. And of course, he also credits the officers who learned about these tactics at West Point from Dennis Hart Mahon. But it would not be without Grant's generalship and inspiration that they would be able to do this. So there was another dissertation that I found quite interesting and useful. And it was by Paul Schmelzer, and it was entitled "A Strong Mind, a Clausewitzian Biography." And within this biography, he goes into quite a bit of depth around why Grant should be considered an example of generalship that comes from Karl von Clausewitz's work on war. And one of his main conclusions is that Grant excelled at the logic of war. A logic of war shares with politics. And given the political circumstances of 1864, Grant was under a lot of pressure. He had to assure that Abraham Lincoln stayed in office in order to end the war successfully. Otherwise, more likely than not, terms would have been made so the Confederate States of America would have successfully seceded from the Union. And this conclusion could be found on page 344. And this was a brilliant quote that he added, Einstein, who perhaps epitomizes the popular image of genius, said it best: politics is much harder than physics. And Grant certainly had to figure out a way to defeat Lee by unique engineering ability and by pushing his men forward. Thank you.